let's get started here. Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, May 9th, 2012. Councilmember Joe Buscaino joined here by the great Councilmember Eric Garcetti here at the Public Works Committee. Thank you all for being here. I just want to say a few things. I'm celebrating my 100th day in office tomorrow. Right. And thank you. I'm still here. I'm still alive, which is great. I want to thank all the bureaus in Public Works. I've been able to establish a good working relationship with each of the bureaus and just some fine employees. The last couple months I've been out there across my district filling potholes, changing LED lights, and I had an opportunity to work with all the supervisors and some of the, not all the supervisors, but a few of the supervisors and also the employees of each of the bureaus. So I want to personally thank each and every one of them for welcoming me and also being responsive to my constituents and the constituents across the city of Los Angeles. So thank you so much, and for that, for just being there and welcoming me into this new journey as a council member. So with that, Mr. Clerk, can you please read off item number 1?
Item number 1 is the city engineer report relative to the vacation of excess right-of-way along Lookout Mountain Avenue on the northeasterly side, adjacent to lots 2 and 3, 2 and 5, and 2 and 7 of Lookout Mountain Park.
Great. Mr. Yu.
Edmund Yu from Public Works Engineering. This is a vacation request for a 14-foot wide strip of land along Lookout Mountain. In this area, Lookout Mountain is one of the key roads to get up to the Hollywood Hills area. The right-of-way in this area is pretty uniform. We really don't see any excess area that the city can vacate. So in this application, the Bureau of Engineering is recommend the City Council to deny this application because we think that we will need to retain the right-of-way for future use.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone here from Council District 5? Please step forward. And do you support this?
Support the denial?
Right.
Yeah, we're looking at it that way. In the Hillside, we often deal with either paper
Can you
street.
identify yourself?
Sure. Sean Bayless from Councilmember Paul Koret's Office Planning and Land Use Deputy.
Thank you.
In the Hillsides, we often deal with streets that are either a paper streets or an entire property that encompasses a street, or a street that will never ever be widened. So we've actually heard nothing but good things about this applicant from the neighborhood council and some of the neighbors. We just have concerns that if this were to be vacated, that the city is then making the conscious decision that this road will never ever be widened because you will then have a permanent cutout into what appears to be a relatively uniform street.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We do have a couple public comment cards here. If I can bring forward Cindy Grant, please. And Cindy will be followed by Sean Bayless.
Okay, can I hand out some?
Sure. Or just give it to the city clerk. Who else are you? Just to be reminded, 2 minutes for public comment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, whole packet. Hearty favors.
Okay. I'm here as the architect on behalf of the client, and I applied for this street vacation a few years ago. At the time we applied, it sounded very positive with Jeff Moore that we would get it. That's why we applied. A neighbor up the street had just been granted one at 8896 Lookout Mountain, which is roughly about 10 houses up. The map that you're seeing, this is a pretty excessive right-of-way, a 50-foot wide right-of-way for the hillside area. The standard right-of-way is 36 feet. And what I think both the City Planning Department and the Bureau of Engineering failed to recognize on this property is that the center line of the street is not is not the center line of the 25-foot paved road here. If you look at this, the center line is actually following the curb right in front of my neighbor's property, which means that 25 feet of that street right-of-way is towards his property. So his property line is actually back there. And incidentally, what we found really strange about this, and you can see this survey here is the backdrop for this site plan I've handed out to you, is that his existing 4-car garage, over half of it is in the public right-of-way. And then a small portion of the whole front of his house is in the public right-of-way. These are permitted structures by Building and Safety, and I've provided in your handouts all of the permits for these structures as they changed over the years. So the problems that I have with this report that they're basing the denial request on are these things that I've marked with the red X's that you'll see. One is the request. The request was not only to allow for a remodel. The request, oh shoot, I'm running out of time. The request was to maintain his existing structures. So they'd be able to keep the 36 right of way.
Thank you. Next is Sean Bayless. Oh, you just spoke already, I'm sorry.
Is it possible for the agenda item open?
We're gonna, I'm gonna move that we approve the city engineer's report.
Can I say
You have,
a question?
You have an
Chris,
engineer?
the city engineer, just a quick question. So what happened, so if this is permitted buildings on what is the right-of-way right now,
Right.
what is the consequence of that? Does that mean those buildings actually have to come down and be moved back?
It's possible that if we don't know how the building was built that way originally, whether that was by permit or by mistake or someone just illegally add on to it. That's one thing that we don't know. But in general, whenever there's private encroachment like that, as much as possible, we will try to work with them to see whether we can allow that to happen. But in this case, the road is, in our opinion, is just too critical for us to retain the easement because that we might need to widen the road in the future. So if we start vacating this, then really that would set the precedent and we would not be able to do any widening in the future.
On that, in terms of I know that's a common thing, we talk about widening the road in the future, and this is different than Wilshire Boulevard or something that we might widen. I mean, we probably have about the density up here that we'll usually have, period. If we widen the road, do you know, because I can't see from these pictures, would there be a lot of other homes that would have to basically be taken out? Are they in the right-of-way? Or is this the
I
only
think
one?
in this area, the road is pretty symmetric along the center line. I think only in this particular stretch, the road is slightly offset as the applicant mentioned. So in general, I think if the city has a chance to widen it, I don't think too many houses will be impacted because of the widening.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, I move that we approve the city engineer's report. Do I have, so without objection, we will move forward to item number 2, please. This is also going to be brought up to full city council as well, so you have an opportunity to speak on that as well. Oh, you actually. So item number 2, please.
We can pledge to reopen public hearing now.
Item number 2 is the city engineer report relative to the vacation of a T-shaped alley southerly of 108th Street and easterly of Clovis Avenue.
And when this is an application by LAUSD in conjunction with one of the new school construction. So what they are trying to do is to vacate the street so they can consolidate the properties to create a new school site. So engineering recommend for approval on this one with conditions.
This happens to be in my district. I have no further questions, Mr. Garcetti.
Nope.
Okay, with that, I move that we approve this motion. And moving to item number 3, if we can take items 3 and 4 together, they're both related to street vacations. And without objection or questions,
No, I'm good.
I move that we approve items 3 and 4.
And would you like me to read those into the record?
Please do, thank you.
Okay, item number 3 is the city engineer report relative to the vacation of 7th Street from Catalina Street to its westerly terminus. And item number 4 is the motion from council members Alarcon and Buscaino relative to the closure of Brand Boulevard, San Fernando Mission walkway located between the 14600 block of Brand Boulevard and the 14600 block of McNeil Street.
Thank you, Mr. City Clerk. Moving forward to item number 5.
Item number 5 is a motion from council members Weezer Garcetti relative to the Bureau of Engineering and City Attorney reporting in regard to the Soto Street Slope Project, and this was continued from February 1st, 2012.
Can I have Bureau of Engineering please come forward? If you can provide us with a status report, please.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Chris Johnson with the Bureau of Engineering. The subject slope on Soto Street failed in the around or about the 04-05 winter storms. The failure caused us to close the sidewalk, the northbound sidewalk on the east side of Soto Street. Reason for the continued closure is presence of a retaining wall within the slope that's become undermined. Its footing has become undermined, and it's a hazard to pedestrians should it fall. The repair is being designed by a private engineer under a B permit. The repair has been delayed due to a change in the B permit engineer. The new engineer hired by the applicant has made an original submittal of their plans for the repair at the beginning of April. Comments have been returned to them, and we are anticipating their resubmittal at any time.
Thank you. If I know there's a representative here from CD 14. Is that Paul? Paul Habib, can you please come forward? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Paul B., Councilman Weezar's office. This has been, as gentlemen indicated, an issue for a number of years now. What we have is a slope failure on city property, so it's the city slope. There was a dispute, and it was determined that it was the city portion, not private property. That hasn't been repaired yet or resolved since it happened. What do you say, 2004?
Yeah, it was during the winter storms, late 2004, early 2005, or thereabouts.
So we now have, and I think you have some pictures you can show, we have on that side of a very busy street, Soto Street is the major connector between Boyle Heights and El Sereno. The sidewalk is closed because K-rails have been placed in the sidewalk to prevent people from walking there in case there's a further slope failure. The problem is that there is no alternative for pedestrians. Across the street, there is no sidewalk. It's adjacent across from Hazard Park, which has a dirt trail that kind of works as a sidewalk. But we are very concerned for a number of things. We see people on the sidewalk get to the K-rails and then try to run across the street. It is right where the 10 freeway comes off, so people come off pretty fast, and it's at the top of an incline where it's blind, you can't see. So if you try to run and a car comes over, it's extremely dangerous. But even more importantly, the sidewalk across the street isn't a sidewalk as we would envision it. It's a dirt pathway. It has accessibility issues for pedestrians, elderly, people with strollers, disabled, a number of things. So we've been asking BOE, number one, how soon can we get this retaining wall up and running and fixed so that this sidewalk can be back in play? And we wanted to clarify, what they think the start date is for starting this work and completing this work. But then, secondly, our office has been on site with the Bureau of Street Services and DOT numerous times in the last a month, but even preceding that, to see can they build some sort of temporary or permanent sidewalk across the street so that we can then officially close the sidewalk at a proper crosswalk, direct pedestrians to cross safely. And we'd ask that this committee consider that as a direction for street services. We'll continue to ask BOE to expedite the completion of this slope process, which is now going on 8 years. 8 years without a sidewalk access is just unacceptable.
Can you respond to that? Is that possible to move forward?
As far as expediting the B permit,
Right.
yes, we've already have direction from the city engineer to expedite the B permit.
And what's the timeline on that?
as I've said, we've returned comments already on the first submittal of the plans. We're expecting a resubmittal at any time, and the initial submittal, we're able to turn it around in a matter of 5 days.
Anyone here from the city attorney's office? Can you also give us a status update? Then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Garcetti for questions, if he has any.
I'm Ted Jordan from the City Attorney's Office. I'm the Public Works General Counsel. However, there were others in our real property group that have been involved in this dispute. They were not able to be here this afternoon, so I can try to answer anything on a more general nature, but these guys here know a lot more about it than I do.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
I obviously this has been, from what I hear, I mean, many years, and moving forward, I'm sure the residents there are frustrated, and they want to have that access, not only to be safe, but also to have some pedestrian access. So I would hold this pending a report back from BOE if we can. So I'll hold this. If you're okay with that?
Yeah,
Eric?
absolutely. That's a good idea.
So with that, we'll hold this motion in this committee, and then we'll ask you to report back.
May I ask that we also get a report back from Street Services on the possibility of doing the sidewalk across the street also?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So you can note that. I have one public comment here, public comment call. Michael Carion, please, step forward.
Few things that they're not telling you. One, Soto Street is our Wilshire Boulevard.
Yes.
You closed it off, people have no access at all, period. Americans with disabilities access, you have to access, but you don't. So how does a person with a wheelchair get by? He doesn't. He has to get in the street. You get on a wheelchair and drive on Wilshire Boulevard, see if you don't get hit. This is 8 years in the making. Come on, gentlemen, what's taking so long? Okay? There's something going on here. Number two, this property has been condemned. I'd like you to bring these people back and ask them, was it condemned? And how did they take it out of being condemned to not being condemned? Number three. Oh, sorry. Number three.
Michael, you got an extra minute. Get it. Yeah. Welcome to Public Works Committee.
5 points.
So I'm curious on how you guys can leave this as it is. We're talking about lives here. People have to cross that street. It's a major thoroughfare there. And they're crossing in the streets. The reason why this came to my attention, I almost hit a child on a bike trying to cross the street. I've got a full-size Suburban pulling a trailer. I can't stop. Thank God there was nobody on my left side. Okay? Now the question that I have, when somebody does get hit, does that hold the city liable? You put the K-rails up. You block that intersection. There is no way to cross on the other side in a wheelchair or in a stroller or anything. When it rains, it's muddy. Okay? None of you will walk that during the rains. Why is it that my neighbors have to do this? This would not happen in West LA, I guarantee you that. Not for 8 years. The city of engineers, whoever it is, they put those rails up and left it. You cannot sit there in good faith tell me that this has been going on for 8 years and everybody's been on top of it. They just ignored it. Why? Because it's in East LA, it's in Boyle Heights, it's in El Sereno. You ignored it. 8 years is too long. All we're asking for is to move the K-rails over 2 feet to allow people to walk on the sidewalk. Your engineers will give you excuse after excuse. My thing is, on the 405 freeway, you have K-rails up, you have fences up, you have all kinds. These are engineers, and they can't figure out a way to move the rails back 2 feet to give the pedestrians right away. Shame on them. Well, they don't live there, so they don't have to deal with this. I leave you with this thought. When somebody does die, it's on your shoulders because you failed to do something about it. Because in my opinion, it's an accident waiting to happen. And you guys are aware of it, so legally, that makes you responsible. I hope you do something about it, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
No.
Nope. Okay, so with that, again, I'll move to hold this motion pending a report back from the BOE and also Street Services as well.
And for the record, will that be continued?
Yes. Yes. Next item, please.
Item number 6 is a motion from council members Buscaino, Rosendahl, Garcetti, and Zine relative to the planning of a citywide parade to honor veterans who have served in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars.
Thank you. I believe I saw Larry Frank here representing the mayor's office. Just to start off, I introduced this motion because I read about what was happening in the city of St. Louis. They had a huge parade honoring the return of the Iraqi war veterans at the end of the Iraq war to celebrate their homecoming. The event drew over 100,000 people, and I thought after the St. Louis parade, nationally there was parades in Chicago, Denver, Philadelphia, San Antonio, Seattle, Tucson, Nashville, all the major cities in America. And I thought, well, you know what, we ought to have one as well, especially in the city of Los Angeles, the second largest city here. And I personally spoke to the mayor about this, and he too was really excited about it and wanted to move forward. And it'd be a great event to honor these troops who've given so much for us and our freedom. And as we all know, we have a thriving veteran population in Los Angeles. So this is fitting that we participate in this effort as well. And Mr. Frank, thanks for being here. I know the planning has begun. If you can just give us some of the highlights and what's in the works.
So again, thank you, Chair of Public Works, Mr. Buscaino, for bringing the energy and the conversation forward in Los Angeles. Good morning or afternoon. Two things to start. Looks like there's about 350,000 veterans that are currently in the three-county area around Los Angeles. Oh. I was thinking it was something like 40,000 veterans being pulled from Iraq in the closure of the Iraq War. But if you look at actually how many people have cycled through Iraq, it's actually closer to about 1.4 million. So there are probably about 75,000 veterans coming back over the course of the cycling out of Iraq over the course of that engagement. So we have in terms of that are from Los Angeles. So there is a large population of returning vets or vets that have returned. And then if you add what's happening in Afghanistan, those numbers are going to probably double in terms of the number of people that have cycled through. So it's totally appropriate for Los Angeles to look at the stand up for the region, to look at really welcoming home. And I think everybody knows that we didn't do a good job in our previous wars of welcoming home our vets. The initial conversation, because as you know, the cost to this kind of activity is very different if it's a city function or if in fact it's a nonprofit that is exercising its free speech. So we're having those initial conversations. The first conversation with some of those nonprofits that are all extremely enthusiastic is very much a initial conversation before a public conversation. It's happening actually at 3 o'clock today. So it's in the very initial stages. There will be, assuming it goes forward, I know there's a conversation about it happening around Veterans Day. The initial conversations have talked about CDD, as they do their Crossroads. They're doing a big Crossroads conference on foster youth next week, but they've actually put money aside to do a Crossroads conference the Thursday, Friday before Veterans Day. There's a talk about doing Veterans Day as a large day of service. There's a talk about doing on the Saturday and the weekend, having restaurants provide reduced or free meals for veterans in Los Angeles. There's talk about doing some kind of fundraising event on that Saturday evening, and then Sunday having the parade, ideally a parade that's central, that actually would be central in Los Angeles so that there would be easy access for public transit. We do know that there's also a real effort by the city and the county to, as you know, Patriotic Hall is where a lot of the veterans organizations are based. The fourth floor is going to actually be made available for a kind of a one-stop employment training center. And so we're looking to kind of build that and make that real, so it's not just a Welcome Home a Hero parade, but but not the city really stepping up and the county stepping up to really take care of our veterans.
Great.
Right, so that looks like it's opening and coming together for September, so we'll have something real in terms of what we're providing in terms of services, and the county obviously has a lot of additional services. So there is the basis for us really, truly welcoming home our veterans this Veterans Day coming up. But again, the first conversations, and I thank you for the leadership from your office. Your office is putting staffing time behind this, and the mayor's office is going to put staffing time behind this. We know it's a large endeavor if we do it right, and it really, truly has to be firmly rooted amongst the veterans organizations. And so the first conversation is happening on that. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because if it's not firmly rooted there, then we are ahead of ourselves. But I was asked to come up and give a report. So that's a straightforward, transparent look at where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Frank, and please do thank the mayor as well for his continued support of this. Today I introduced a motion that would add this event to the list of citywide special events. So this event will also be eligible for a subsidy, similar to large-scale events like the Oscars as well, to help provide some of this funding to make sure this happens. I also want to make sure that we add street services during the planning process as well, and making sure that that bureau is included in the planning process, if we can ask for that.
So the people might know Mark Fleischer, but he's somebody that's very interested in helping put this together. He's been helpful in terms of on a pro bono basis up until now.
Great.
His suggestion is that we have a kind of a Veterans Oversight Committee, and that we'll actually put together two committees to start. Was the Veterans Oversight Committee and then actually Elected Leaders Committee, which would actually have some of the offices that are interested in making this a significant event for Southern California.
Great.
And so those are the two committees I think that would first come together, and that's going to be discussed today.
Well, I'll turn it over to our Navy Reserve officer here, Councilmember Garcetti.
Thank you, and thanks for doing this, Chairman. One of the places you should also look and reach out to, and unfortunately the original planner of it is no longer with us, but Johnny Grant did a big parade after the first Gulf War along Hollywood Boulevard, and it was actually a parade not just for those vets that were returning, but for the Vietnam vets who never had a homecoming and a welcome, and it was the first time they had been brought together. It was a very, very powerful event. I assume you've started reaching out to Department of Defense, or I know the complications. Department of Defense doesn't yet want to and isn't authorized to be able to do anything official, but I do know that certainly through the Guard and other resources, there can be, some of the things that are military that would still be in a parade, and if I can assist in that in any way, let me know.
That would be great. Yeah, as you know, the complication is that we still are fighting a war, so there was initially a kind of a response until we bring back, the troops from Afghanistan. Maybe we should wait. The way it's been answered in every other city is let's celebrate the returning Iraqi vets and those that have returned from Afghanistan, and then when the time comes, we will celebrate their return as well, is how the other cities have handled it. We would love some help on it. We actually are in touch with the Guard, and I think they will actually be at this conversation today, but we don't have an official connection yet because we're not exactly sure how to approach that yet.
Okay. I'll talk to a few people and see what we can do to help out. I know there's certain folks who would be authorized to come to something like this, like recruiters and things like that, so you can get things in the parade like we do with the Hollywood Christmas Parade and some other things. So be happy to help, and glad to hear Mark's involved too.
Yeah,
that's great.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to move we continue this for 30 days pending a report back on the planning process.
Sounds great.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Okay.
Is that all we have today?
So item 7, we have numerous speaker cards here in place. If you can read the item for me, please.
Item number 7 is the city attorney report relative to the developments regarding the regulation of the placement of cell towers and related equipment. This is also referred to the Planning, Land Use, and Management Committee.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to limit our public comment to 1 minute since we have numerous speakers. If I can, and we'll take speakers first. And I'll first call up Nancy Friedman, followed by Barbara Cohen, and followed by Christina Spitz. If you can just come forward, those 3 speakers. Good afternoon.
We've had an influx of proposed towers in Brentwood, and one was, they seem to be getting larger and larger and larger. And there was an outcry and a meeting, and we finally have come to the realization that your committee may not know that an ordinance was due 60 days after a meeting about a year ago. So we need to get some direction on this. We need to do some work on it, and we need to get this going because it's all over the city. We don't understand. We need to be educated. We're willing to learn, and we want to know if there's different types of equipment instead of these 6 foot 9 times around a pole in front of a church or schools or whatever is a necessity. So I'm asking you to put an interim control ordinance in effect, and I think a lot of people will be asking the same thing. It's been done in other cities. It's been successful, and we need it because it's not getting the direction that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Barbara Cohen?
Barbara Cohen.
Sorry. Cohen?
I yield my minute to Chris Spitz. So she has 2 minutes. Is that all right?
That's fine. That's fine, yes. So, Chris Spitz, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Chris Spitz. I'm chair of the Land Use Committee, PPCC, and also vice president of PPRA, and I'm speaking on behalf of both today, if you don't mind. This picture I've been holding up because it related to what Nancy Friedman was telling you. This is a tower that was proposed by AT&T for Brentwood, next to 3 schools, across from a synagogue, next to a church. Huge outcry, huge outpouring of opposition. Councilman Rosendahl opposed it. It's an exempt pole. The cabinet, just so you understand on this ordinance, the cabinet requires a permit, but the pole itself, which is a replacement utility pole, is completely exempt. It has 9 antennas. It's bigger than anything we've seen. There's nothing like this on Sunset Boulevard, which is a designated scenic highway from Hollywood to the Pacific Ocean. Now, in fairness, Mr. Tamaki from AT&T is here, and I've already expressed him appreciation because they have withdrawn these plans. But at the same time, Mr. Tamaki and other representatives have told us they need to install bigger and larger equipment just like this, which is not like anything we've seen before, in the public right-of-way throughout the city. Now, we need an ordinance now that regulates these things. The city attorney report, which came out 10 months ago, approximately, which was also long awaited, did say that these things can be, the exemption can be removed, and we can properly bring these things within a permitting process. That's all we're asking. We're also asking for an ICO. An ICO is appropriate in these circumstances. What we're saying is do an ICO only with respect to public right-of-way wireless communication facilities, not every single item in the public right-of-way, not every cell tower in the city. Many cities have had these. These are well known to be legal. They're well known, in fact, to be to go in place without a lot of trouble from the cell industry. Everybody accepts them. The cell industry itself agreed to them many years ago in a communication with the FCC. We've been talking about this for years and years and years. There's a gentleman in the audience here from Hollywood who's been talking about this and trying to get proper regulations since 2006. So we ask your support. And please, we need the full council involved at this point. Thank you.
Chris. Next 3 speakers, Jessica Duboff, Doug Arsenault, and Maria Fisk. Please come forward. Jessica.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Duboff. I'm here on behalf of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber represents 1,600 organizations of all sizes, including hundreds of small businesses. For many of these companies, quality wireless service is critical to maintaining and growing business. They rely on broadband services to communicate with customers, vendors, and other clients daily. The demand for wireless services has been growing at a pace that even those in the industry couldn't have predicted. Currently, wireless associations report that roughly 20% of traditional U.S. landline users have switched to wireless only, and that rate is increasing exponentially. Wireless infrastructure is expensive to maintain and upgrade. When wireless carriers build or improve a network cell site in a community, they are investing capital to improve the infrastructure that directly benefits the public. The anticipated wireless ordinance should ensure that wireless companies can effectively build and maintain the infrastructure to meet the demands of city residents. The Chamber urges the Council to adopt a wireless ordinance that allows carriers to make the necessary upgrades in infrastructure to provide optimal coverage in all of our business corridors, open spaces, and residential neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Doug, followed by Maria Fisk. Maria here? She had to leave. Okay.
See you in the valley.
Yeah, running towards.
Cut you down already there.
I know, right? Good afternoon. My name is Doug Arsenault of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. VICA represents more than 370 businesses in the city and surrounding areas that have created over 100,000 jobs. VICA recognizes that cellular service coverage is critical to the residents and businesses of Los Angeles, including those on both sides of this issue. The unprecedented and explosive growth of wireless broadband usage in the past few years requires increased bandwidth for personal and business communications. In the last year alone, smartphone consumption has seen an 89% growth with increased use of devices such as the iPhone and the Android. These users are business leaders and consumers for neighborhood businesses. The fact is, more coverage requires more tower construction, and wireless service providers are doing so responsibly, in accordance with the city zoning code. They engage community leaders, including neighborhood councils, city council members, and individual property owners when proposing wireless locations. The vast majority of antennae are revolutionarily different from the traditional eyesores that are being passed around in the photos that you see. They include incorporating elements such as screening antennas.
Thank you,
Please do not allow a vocal minority to inhibit the fulfillment of our city's general need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next three speakers, Yegid Kashishian, Janet Turner, Kevin Tamaki, please step forward.
Good afternoon. Yeri Kashishian with the Central City Association, representing the 450 members, which collectively employ 350,000 individuals throughout the city. Speaking on behalf of our members, we, CCA, would urge this committee to lead the way in working with the wireless industry to provide optimal wireless service for all of us who are increasingly reliant on it for everything that we do. We have all experienced firsthand the increased demand for wireless service over the past few years. More people and businesses are going wireless today, and more are using wireless for data-intensive uses. We need to facilitate the process for the wireless service providers to upgrade their networks to keep pace with the surge in demand. This necessitates working with the wireless industry to ensure that our businesses and residents have a better wireless experience, one with more reliability, enhanced services, and fewer dropped calls. That would serve the broader interests of our businesses and residents throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet?
Yes, Janet
Welcome.
Turner. I'm president of Pacific Palisades Community Council, and I'm on the board of the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils. I'm here today to present the letter from RAC, which is a group of 13 neighborhood and city councils, community councils, who have come together in a coalition. We are from areas in CD5 and CD11. All of the members of RAC voted unanimously to ask this committee to support a draft revision of the above-ground facilities ordinance, which you did on July 2011. And so we're back saying it's almost 9 months, guys, and we really would like to see something soon. Of course, we're very concerned that there is inadequate notice and that aesthetic provisions need to be addressed, and this whole aspect of the exemption of utility and light poles, which can be legally addressed. Again, we would appreciate if you would push this forward now. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Tamaki? Kevin will be followed by Glenn Bailey, Carol Stein, and Richard Stein.
Good afternoon, Chairman Buscaino, Councilmember Garcetti. I would ask, with your permission, would it be okay to have my colleague Anita Gabrielian speak before me?
Sure, no problem.
Be okay?
Anita?
Thank
Did you fill out a card?
I did fill out a card,
Okay.
and so did Lupita Sanchez Cornejo.
Yeah, I
and
see
she
Lupita's.
was going to yield her minute to me.
Okay.
So may I have 2 minutes then?
Go ahead, 2 minutes
Good
for
afternoon,
Anita.
and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share comments on behalf of AT&T. The existing and growing wireless service is unprecedented, and this service depends on significant infrastructure investments and upgrades to meet that demand. We remain committed to ensure that we're able to provide residents and businesses wireless service they expect and demand, and to continue to work with local neighborhoods to find the optimal solutions. In California, more than 3 out of 10 households rely on only wireless phones. Over the past 5 years, AT&T's wireless data traffic has grown 20,000%. And we've seen at least a doubling every year since 2007. So the implications are profound. We are proud that AT&T continues to make significant investments in Los Angeles and throughout Southern California, because residents and businesses are demanding it, not just for business and personal reasons, but for in emergency situations and for public safety reasons. I applaud your recent motion introduced on Friday to improve the city and technology sector and create jobs for Angelenos. AT&T invested more than $1.7 billion in the greater Los Angeles area wireless and wireline networks from 2009 to 2011, creating good jobs as well. During 2011, AT&T made nearly 2,250 wireless network upgrades with very few appeals. And where there were appeals, there were some community outreach, and the response was incredible in support as well. In a recent permit application, in less than 48 hours, we received over 200 letters of support. I don't want to take the time, and I can't, to read them to you, but they are wonderful. You play a critical role in ensuring that all neighborhoods within our great city have access to the best possible wireless by adopting a balanced and thoughtful ordinance. We thank you, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Anita.
Oh, I have some information that I can leave behind for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Kevin Tamaki, go ahead. And he'll be followed by Glenn Bailey, Carol Stein, and Richard Stein.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Tamaki from AT&T External Affairs. AT&T has a history of engaging the community in terms of installations for wireless facilities. As the demand for wireless has exploded, especially in the last couple of years, it is increasingly important for providers like AT&T to know what's on the minds of community stakeholders, whether there are customers or not. Recently, we worked with residents and the Bureau of Street Lighting to develop a street lighting pole design, which has been widely accepted. And so consequently, we know that these types of designs are successful, and we urge the committee to keep in place the exemption for the streetlight pole design. We agree there should be reasonable and specific notice given to property owners that are directly affected by the proposed wireless installation. A good place to start is the current notification pattern, which has worked well when wireless designs are reviewed. So with a 20,000% increase in wireless data over the last 5 years, we have a tall order, yet we must still engage the community as we work to meet customer demand. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Glenn Bailey, please.
Glenn Bailey, equal time with AT&T's 2 minutes. Board member of Encino Neighborhood Council. I wanted to comment, first of all, on the removing the exception for utility pole and street light installations. One example, we had a proposal to install on a line that went into the Orange Line busway and parkway, bikeway, whatever, just because there was a dead-end pole there, and they said we could because the pole was there. Totally inappropriate, because landscaped area, millions of dollars have been spent, and it would be an eyesore to put it in the middle of that landscape area. Also, the notification does need to be broadened beyond the adjacent property owners. One example is we had a application in the Sepulveda Basin, second largest open space in the city. Nobody was notified because the 2,100 acres owned by the Army Corps of Engineers leased to the city. None of the surrounding property owners or the neighborhood council were advised about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Stein, please. Richard Stein, 2 minutes for Richard Stein, Mr.
Thank
City
you very
Clerk.
much.
Thank you.
I'm Richard Stein. I am a recently retired English professor from the University of Oregon. And my wife and I moved to Los Angeles to be close to a daughter and 2 grandchildren. And I thank the members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. In brief, I'm here in support of various neighborhood organizations that are calling for an ICO while the city looks carefully at new guidelines for a revised ordinance. Cell technology is changing fast. The old language won't work. I'm speaking to you specifically because precisely at this half hour, we were due to have an appeal heard before the Board of Public Works concerning an installation AT&T has scheduled to be placed in our front yard at 373 North Kenter. And I can assure you from personal experience that we were not notified about this installation and that AT&T has not been forthcoming in working with us. I don't wish to argue the particulars of our appeal here. What I do wish to say is that I think both we and our neighbors who join us in our objections, and indeed AT&T and other cell providers, would be served well by revised guidelines that would make the rules clearer, that would indeed support expanded coverage for private and business use in Los Angeles, but would also guarantee some protections for people like us. As things stand now, we aren't allowed to address the poles. We're only allowed to address installations on the ground. And I think to a great extent our hands are tied to speak about real concerns. It's up to you to make a new ordinance that addresses our needs and the emerging world of cell technology. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speakers will be Laura Stevich, Paul O'Boyle, and Leslie Daigle. Laura?
It's Laura Stoik. Thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I am a parent at St. Martin of Tours. I'm a parent of two children at St. Martin of Tours School, which is the school depicted in the image that Chris Spitz was holding up. And as you know, AT&T approached the school to use the public right-of-way pole. A year ago, they approached the school to use the school grounds, specifically the bell tower, which the school said no to. I'm a member of the council that opposed that, and we were responding to the large outcry from the parents and the parishioners that did not want that. I would just simply want to echo what Chris Spitz said, that you can help cure this notification problem that so many have spoken about by urging the council to enact this ICO. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul O'Boyle, please.
Hello, Commissioner. My name is Paul O'Boyle. I'm here representing NextG Networks. It's a fiber optic company which operates a distributed antenna system. It's a carrier-neutral technology. Basically means it can accommodate AT&T, Verizon, all the carriers. It does not have any bandwidth that's regulated by the FCC. It's a public utility with a CPCN through the CPUC. Thank you. And we have over 600 facilities in the city. And we understand the concerns of the citizens. Our facilities our antennas are about 24 inches long and about 3 inches in diameter that stick on top of utility poles. The equipment does not touch the ground. It's bolted or strapped to the utility pole. What we ask is you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There is obviously a need for this type of technology because of the need that you hear here. And also I understand the aesthetics. If you're going to regulate these things, we recommend a tiered system where you address the aesthetics based upon size. And then if it goes larger, then it would go into a CUP process.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Leslie? Leslie be followed by our last speaker, Alexander Van Wenschmar.
Good afternoon.
Leslie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Leslie Daigle representing Verizon Wireless. We have 4 points. The first is the city attorney's office only plans have been to modify the right-of-way provisions and not address wireless facilities generally in Los Angeles. Secondly is we support continuing the exemption for streetlights, which are otherwise controlled by the city as the owner and landlord of the streetlights. Third, we believe a moratorium is unjustified and would be illegal. And fourth, at present, as we've stated in our letter to the committee, Verizon Wireless expresses our willingness to participate in drafting the amendments that are limited as proposed by the city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Alexander?
Yes, I'm Alexander von Wechmar, and I'm a member of the board of the Oaks Homeowners Association, representing about 800 residents in the Hollywood Hills, adjacent to Griffith Park. And I also have a picture here of a cell site it's an AT&T site that was erected in our neighborhood, this one, right in front of the iconic Hollywood sign. And the owner of the property has this view now, had a much better view before, and he has never been asked for permission to do this. And this site, this particular pole, was erected without a city permit. When we got involved in this was at a time when this uncontrolled invasion of cell sites into residential neighborhoods began. Your colleague, Tom LaBanche, and then Councilmember Janice Hahn both introduced a motion in City Council to regulate this. And we were wondering what has happened in the last 6 years. Nothing. And I think it's time to act. And I should point out that the moratorium is an option because the CPUC and the cell phone industry have agreed some years ago on making, of allowing a moratorium, as we are requesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just listening from public comment, many of you are asking for that moratorium to be placed, and this was something, as Chair of Public Works, I wanted to hear here in committee, and I understand the frustrations, and I just want to get this moving forward, because I have found that the city moves slow in a lot of things, and being here, like I said, almost 100 days, I just want to move forward with this issue. Even in my district, it's an issue that definitely on everyone's radar, literally. What I want to do now is call up the city attorney, if I may. Give us a short background and update, and if you can, on where we're at here.
Certainly. Again, Ted Jordan, Public
Thanks,
Works
Ted.
General Counsel from the City Attorney's Office. And congratulations on your first 100 days.
Thank you.
And I'm sure in your next 100 days we can see real progress. Let me just start off by saying I agree with virtually everything that's been said by the public comment, both from the Chambers of Commerce, the community, and the wireless industry. I have concerns about a moratorium from a legal standpoint, but let me put that issue aside for a minute and talk about the substance.
Sure.
Back in 2011, in response to two different council motions, we presented a report which was the culmination of a lot of work by a number of different attorneys. We looked at the city's ordinance, we looked at case law, because what instigated those motions was an evolving framework that both state and federal courts were putting into play. There was uncertainty as to what the law is. Cases have come along that have provided the city more certainty. There's still some doubt about some areas of the law, but we're confident that we can move forward. So what we put into our report was a summary of the law that regulates cell phone towers and other equipment of that type, both state law and federal law, and we are regulated by both, along with some specific recommendations that we could implement by ordinance change.
Can you walk us through those recommendations?
I can walk you through those
thank you.
recommendations. Let me just start off by saying that the Board of Public Works is the custodian of the streets. It governs what goes into the right-of-way. Well, there is one big gaping hole in that regulation, and that's an exemption that's in the above-ground facilities ordinance concerning installations mounted on utility poles. It includes streetlight poles, which I'll talk about separately, because I think the real problem is the utility poles. So our number one recommendation that we could implement very quickly is to simply delete the exemption in the above-ground facilities ordinance for installations mounted on utility poles. Now, we would have to be clarifying that it doesn't include the equipment that DWP puts on there. There may be equipment that is small and unobtrusive, which is different than what you saw in the pictures, so we might have some size limits. But as a basic matter, we would remove the exemption for cell phone towers that are mounted on utility poles.
So I heard that street light mounted cell antennas are embedded into the light, so there's no real aesthetic impact.
The Bureau of Street Lighting has worked with industry, the communication industry, to come up with street light designs. It's not on your historic street lights. It's more on the more modern street lights. Exactly.
Do you have pictures on any of these by any chance? Does anybody have a picture?
You know, I do not.
I'm trying to look on the internet right now to see what everybody's talking about, but I can't find any.
And I don't see anyone raising their hand. We can provide.
Sure.
But we can provide those to you.
Okay.
Just so that you know, when we are grappling with these issues before the Board of Public Works, the ones that come before the board, it's a good process. There is notification. People are heard. Now, maybe we can improve the notification, and that's one of our other recommendations. When we are asked to approve a site that's going to go in the right-of-way, it's often a pole.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we ask ourselves is, well, rather than having a brand-new pole in the right-of-way, is there somewhere else we can put it? In some streets, there are streetlights. And in many situations, those streetlights provide an ideal alternative location. Now, they will not make everybody happy. There will be some people that won't like it on the streetlight. And I don't think you can make everybody happy in these situations, but the streetlights are a very good, viable alternative for many cell installations. And as the technology advances, although bandwidth demands grow, the antenna designs may also shrink. And so I think the cell towers on the streetlights is a very good opportunity. So as we go forward, we look to the city council and the full city council to give us direction.
Mm-hmm.
We would ask that the report go to council with an instruction that the city attorney should prepare ordinance revisions. And I was walking you through the first one, which is removing the exemption.
Right.
That's the main thing. I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, well more than 95% of the complaints that we hear are the things that we don't regulate, which are the utility poles.
Mhm.
Now, there are complaints from time to time about other things. The cabinets that are on the ground, sometimes it's in front of someone's house. They don't like that, but the overwhelming majority of the complaints, and indeed all of the pictures you saw here, were the things that we don't regulate. So we would ask to be instructed to amend the ordinance to regulate that which we don't currently. The other two recommendations in the report, they're important, but they're by far subsidiary to that original demand.
Mhm.
One area that we recommended is to change the notification pattern. If you imagine a residential street, because most of these issues are in residential
Mhm.
areas,
Right.
the applicant for the cell tower or the cabinet, they have to, in addition to notifying the council office and the neighborhood council and also homeowners associations, although HOAs are difficult because some of them are very informal, they don't have any, ownership of common areas, and sometimes they're frankly below the radar. But in addition to notifying the neighborhood council and the council office, they also notify the adjacent property owner, which means the person whose house is right at that cell tower. And then the abutting property owners, the folks next door. So if you imagine a typical residential street, if there's a pole in the middle of in the sidewalk in the middle of the street, it's going to be the house right in front plus the two next door neighbors, and then the people across the street from them. So you're talking about maybe 6 houses, plus the neighborhood council, plus the council office.
Mhm.
We would propose expanding that. We've talked about different options, and we could flesh that out as we prepare the ordinance and bring it back to the council.
What would you recommend?
Well, one option that has been discussed, and I'm going to save what my recommendation is. I just want to give you the options because these are policy decisions. One option was to make it consistent with what we do for conditional use permits, which is something on the order of a 500-foot radius.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work necessarily in all cases because you're going to get people that are not even on that street. You're going to get people on the next street over. You could look at something that's more of a linear measure, which is people on that street, but perhaps farther than just the adjacent property owner and the 2 next door neighbors and the people across the street. It could be people on that block.
Mhm.
It could be people, within a certain distance, 100 feet, some measurement on that street. And if it's on a corner, then it would be the cross street also, rather than just simply putting a point and drawing a circle around it. Because in some properties, like the one that you heard about before, which was in the Sepulveda Basin area, I'm not familiar with that site, but I'm not sure if a 500-foot radius would have changed anything. If you're talking about an area where there's a large amount of open space, or maybe it's space owned by the Army Corps that's leased to the city, because we're certainly not going to oppose them. So the second recommendation is the second recommendation for changing the ordinance would be the notification pattern. I think some increase is appropriate, but we'd have to look at that sort of from a balanced standpoint, because people that are not even on the street, their interest is less. And then
What do other cities do when it comes to notifications process?
I'd have to take a look at our notes again from our review of the
Mhm.
of the ordinances. I believe they're somewhere in the nature of 500 feet or less, but I could look at that and then report more fully back to you. Although, as we do this, I don't want to I don't want to continue this and have to report back to you here in this
No,
committee
we wanna move
in a
forward,
couple of
right.
weeks with that information. My
Right.
preference would be that the report go forward.
Sure.
And then we can report to you with the ordinance in hand and then tell you what they are. Because
Got it.
my number one goal is, and the goal of our office, is to advance this, to get full council to tell us to do the ordinance.
And let me be clear, I agree with the city attorneys in not having a moratorium, but just moving forward in this process and expediting it.
Yeah. I have concerns about that, but I want to stick with this ordinance now because we can have a full discussion on moratorium, while council is giving us the instruction. Because I think once we get a specific instruction, we can bring you back an ordinance quickly. The third recommendation that we had in our report was to, actually, let me pull out the report here because I'm going to add a fourth one, was to enhance the aesthetic requirements. The existing AGF ordinance that governs things other than utility poles, that's the big gaping hole, already has some aesthetic criteria. We've looked at other cities, and they have more specific details, and we've outlined some of them in the report. And in one case, cities whose ordinances have already been challenged and have been successful. We would like to bring in some of those additional specific criteria into our ordinance and then give the Board of Public Works a stronger tool to say no. Because when you're talking about aesthetic requirements, that means occasionally they're going to say no. And we need to have support in the ordinance in order to provide the substantial reason to justify a legal challenge if we say no. Now, there's one thing that I didn't put in the report. In the time
But there'll be specific language on how to proceed in that, in the ordinance.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Would you know what that,
Well,
can you project what that language is going to?
It's items that are contained in our report, and if I brought a copy with me, so I can pull that out right now. These are some examples from cases from the Ninth Circuit. Prohibition on non-camouflaged cell towers in residential or rural areas. The next one is something that I don't think is a problem here, but it was part of their ordinances. All signs and other attention-getting graphics, except those containing safety warnings on cell towers, are prohibited. I don't think that's a particular problem here, but we would include that. Cell towers, colors, and designs had to be integrated and compatible with existing on-site and surrounding buildings. Sometimes we have monopoles, which is just a freestanding pole with an antenna on it. If it's in an industrial area or an area where there's steel streetlights, we'll have a bare metal pole that will, to the best extent possible, blend in with existing poles. On other stretches of the road, where maybe you have only the occasional wooden pole, a metal pole would stand out like a sore thumb. So they have a pole that can be covered with a material that makes it look just like wood, and I've seen it, and it's pretty realistic looking. So it has to be site-specific. It has to blend in with what's there.
Got it.
I've seen monopole designs that are designed to look like the cast iron old-fashioned streetlights. So you have that sort of fluted design around the pole. In some areas, that would be the most appropriate. So we would build in examples like that. And it's on page 9 in my report where we gave some specific criteria that are contained in other ordinances that have survived challenge. Now, there's an additional area that in the time that we were at committee, we've had a chance to talk to some of the wireless community about, and we've taken a look at it, and we think it probably makes sense. And that is providing a time limit on the permits. Right now, when you get an AGF permit, you're good to go. It doesn't expire. Other cities that have started looking at their regulations and trying to impose some greater balance, they put time limits on there. Now, San Francisco has a time limit of 2 years, and they're facing a legal challenge right now by several members of the wireless community because the California Government Code puts a limit of 10 years, as anything less than 10 years is presumptively unreasonable. Now, we're going to take a look at that. So I'm not saying that we should necessarily have a 10-year time limit, but part of the instruction we'd like back from council is to include some type of time measure that we would put into the ordinance. Now, it may be that after a certain number of years, it would give the city a chance to reopen that application and take a look at it. There may be situations when a tower or a cabinet are put on the ground in the right-of-way, and after it's put in, it gets taken out by a car in an accident. Well, that might happen more than once. Sometimes sites prove to be more dangerous than they were originally believed to be. we would want to be able to take a look at a site like that and say, we know we gave you a permit, and maybe we gave you a permit for a certain number of years, but that site's proven to be dangerous. We believe we would have the right, even under the California Government Code, to come in and say, we're going to suspend that and make you move that site because it's now become a public safety issue. Now, when I talk about public safety, there's one thing that you may hear a lot about, and that's the radio emissions from the cell towers. As we made clear in our report, and I can reiterate it here, federal law, the Federal Telecommunications Act, prohibits local governments from regulating the location or the siting of cell towers based on their environmental effects. So in other words, health effects are off the table. Now there's one proviso. The cell towers have to operate within FCC limits. So we could require people, when they provide their applications, to provide some documentation or certification that the antenna that they propose to install operates within FCC limits. If it's not there, then health effects are on the table. But once they've made that certification, federal law prohibits us from regulating the location based on the health effects. So the site that you heard about here, which was originally proposed to be a private property site in the bell tower at the St. Martin of Tours Church, that was, we didn't deny that. The property owner
did, right?
Based on the objections, declined. And they have every right to do so. They're a private property owner. They can always say no. If that went to the city for approval of a CUP, our hands would be tied, assuming that that facility was operating within FCC limits. But ironically, when we look at these when we look at right-of-way installations, we ask ourselves often, is there anywhere else it can go? Is there a private property site we can put it? Is there a street light? Unfortunately, that was a situation where in some respects, the ideal location, an existing tower up high, where the antennas themselves could be camouflaged with architectural features. You'd never see it. It ended up not being an appropriate site for the private property owner. And again, they always had that right, and we would never take that right away. But unfortunately, that only leaves the right-of-way. And so that's why, we support the recommendations here to remove that exemption and provide a stronger regulation.
Great. Turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Garcetti, for questions.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. Thank you, and obviously very supportive of your move, Mr. Chair, to get this moving again. In terms of notification, I think there is probably a smart way that we can do this and better notify without it being so broad that it hits people, like you're saying, who aren't even affected, but to hear stories of folks who were directly affected and not notified, obviously, is not the way forward. On the aesthetics, it really occurs to me, for a long time, we used to have a city architect. She's now our deputy city engineer, but I've always been a fan of the title and expanding the role of what a city architect could do, because when we look at aesthetics in our city, we have such great designers. I mean, we're the center of kind of creative design in the world, and we do such a lousy job with our industrial design of these cell towers. And it's really something, I think, where the industry and community could come together and make this, when you look at other places around the world, when you have leadership, the mayor of Paris looking at new ways and beautiful bridges to make. I've always thought when we did our City Beautiful movement here and we see the bridges that are across the LA River, that was a moment in time in which the city really did put a premium on design. And now, the cell phone towers that I've seen, many of them I know done by independent contractors, not necessarily by the cell phone companies themselves. I mean, at best are like these horrible faux somethings. They don't fool anybody. They look like a palm tree. Nobody goes, yay. I feel very calm looking at this palm tree, or it's, behind a fake bison and, all these really, I mean, it's like the worst of architecture, as opposed to, I've seen some designs in places in Europe. I mean, I've seen Ericsson working on this, who obviously as a cell phone manufacturer has a lot, where we could define, a modern look of a city. And we have such a pastiche around the city of different styles that, MTA recently has moved, or Metro has recently moved, to, instead of making every single station in the rail lines that we're building be different, which was really beautiful when we did it for the Red Line, for instance. Let's have some visual cues around the city that really unify the city, that we come together, we have design competitions where we bring people together. And, if part of this is kind of an informal track at the same time that we're looking at a formal ordinance, but I think there's really space for this. I think there's space for the industry and for our design community to come together, to reach out to Otis, school design or something, and look at this and have people vote in the city on, what would make LA actually look more pleasant. We do that all the time with our street lights, and this is just another utility. We would never stick up street lights just kind of on random wooden poles and have them hanging off this direction and that direction. We think that through. but for some reason when it comes to this, and part of it is that there's a lot of competition in the industry and there's different companies involved, but we as the city, I think, really could play a role in trying to look more carefully at the aesthetics, and we really haven't seen any designs where the form is function. It's more, find something and pretend that it's not a cell phone tower. Admit that it's a cell phone tower and make them beautiful, make them at the scale that's right for the community. Because I think there's nobody in this room, including those who have been horrified to find certain pieces of architecture in their front yard or proposed, that doesn't want to have good cell phone coverage. I mean, we have terrible cell phone coverage in the city, and that's where the industry is right. I mean, we all have dropped calls all the time. We all have, terrible coverage, but we can do better. And so I think it's going to be a combination of what we do directly through this ordinance and Public Works, but maybe we should reach out to our Bureau of Engineering, talk to Deborah to see if we can't, she was formerly our city architect, maybe oversee bringing together some of our design folks, bring in the LA Times, Christopher Hawthorne, and see what this city could do to bring about better looking cell towers.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti, for your comments.
Oh, I'll take it.
I would also, so you want to add that fourth recommendation on providing a timeline for the permit for the permit process?
Yes. So if we didn't submit a revised report, so if you look at the report right now, we give you those three tools that are available, and they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, we are recommending all three. I would add a fourth, that any issued AGF permit have some type of timing component that will limit its duration, or at least allow the city to have some kind of reopener. So
without objection, I move that we will include that in that providing the time limits on the permit process. So with that, I would request the city attorney to draft the ordinance with recommended changes. I also ask that you also include DWP planning, as well as the council office and the other affected parties in drafting the language. I understand this report will now go to Plum Committee for concurrence. Is that my understanding?
Yes. Yeah. Great. So the instruction that is your recommendation. So then eventually council will adopt that report with those recommendations, and then we will get cracking on the ordinance right away.
Very good. Without objection, we'll move. And I appreciate the time and the presentation. And thank you so much. And thank you for those who appeared here during the public comment period on item number 7.
No problem.
So any other public comment?
No, there's none.
Very good. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.